So welcome back for the second session of the day. In the first session, of course, we were swimming mostly in the waters to understand the emerging maritime equations in the Indo-Pacific. And we learned a lot, actually. Now it's time to get into the land, probably, and know more about the evolving geopolitics. And we have with us none other than Professor Chintamani Mahapatra, who is the Pro-Vice-Chancellor of Jawaharlal Nehru University. It's my alma mater too. So he will be sharing his vast experience in dealing with the Indo-Pacific issues. The theme that he'll be talking about is the emerging geopolitics and challenges to a stable, free, and open Indo-Pacific. Just to briefly introduce Professor Mahapatra, he's the Vice Chancellor of JNU, Pro-Vice Chancellor of JNU since 2016, and he's concurrently Professor of American Studies at the School of International Studies of JNU. Professor Mahapatra is also editor of Indian Foreign Affairs Journal, published by the Association of Indian Diplomats. He is the founder and honorary chairperson of Kalinga Institute of Indo-Pacific Studies. And he held a lot of positions such as member UGC Review Committee, Area Studies Program member, Fellowship Expert Committee, ICSSR, editor, Indian Foreign Affairs Journal, and member Editorial Board Strategic Affairs, IDSA, member Editorial Board Diaspora Studies, and member Committee on Studies, Academy of International Studies at Jamia Millia Islamia. And recently he was a Tagore Chair Professor of Yunnan University of China. He has conducted a lot of research work in several US presidential libraries and US National Archives, and also the British Public Record Office in London. Professor Mahapatra has authored and edited as many as 8 books and contributed chapters in as many as 30 edited books. He has published about 70 research articles in reputed journals and is guided 26 PhD scholars and 51 MPhil degree scholars. He has a wide range of exposure to international academic institutions in the US, UK, France, Israel, Australia, Sweden, China, Vietnam, Singapore, and Austria. He has been awarded a number of international fellowships, such as a Fulbright Fellowship, a Commonwealth Fellowship, and Visiting Fellowship to understand research in the US, UK, Australia, Austria, and many other countries. So he has been visiting faculty in many of the colleges also, like the academic staff colleges, the Foreign Service Institute of the Ministry of External Affairs, National Defense College, Army War College, Naval War College, and College of Air Warfare. So he's also a regular commentator in newspapers and on audiovisual media on international affairs. So we are blessed to have him today and learn from his immense experience and academic research in the Indo-Pacific region. Professor Mahapatra will share his perspective extempore, and he wishes the session to be more interactive, I understand, and hence encourages more questions and thoughts to be shared by the participants. I would urge scholars to either type their questions in the chat box, or please raise your hand in the Zoom so that we can unmute and allow you to speak. But please be very specific if you happen to speak. Over to you, Mahapatra.
Good morning to one and all. Let me at the outset express my happiness and delight and thankfulness to ISB and Professor Sridhar for giving me this opportunity. And I think this is co-sponsored by the American Consulate based in Hyderabad. So I thank all of you for this opportunity to interact with the intellectuals from around the country. There are 100+ people in this webinar. Now, I'm sure all of you would have learned a great deal and had a good time discussing the issues in the previous session by Vice Admiral. Like in the human body, so on Earth, 70%, roughly 70% is all water. So a lot of things must have been covered, and that would have raised quite a few questions and observations in your mind. So that's why I had requested Siddharji to make it a little more interactive. So what I'll do is I will make broad mega observations on this region called Indo-Pacific and what are the prospects and challenges for maintaining peace and stability and promoting developmental cooperation. Now, the title is very well thought out and well chosen. Uh, ISB is older than the Indo-Pacific concept, but choosing the Indo-Pacific as a theme of discussion is really good. Quite some time ago, the businessmen and the companies in India were not very interested in international affairs. But of late, this is a good sign that what is going on around the world is also important for the business school. And the students who are doing business administration or related subjects, they must know international affairs and relations because those kind of politics and relations and interaction between nation states have a direct impact on trade and business and investment, in the share market, and so many issues related to the economy. So I really congratulate them for choosing a topic like this. Now, first I will allude to the point that developmental cooperation, the title of your webinar, the developmental cooperation is more important today than perhaps about 2 years ago. Developmental cooperation is going on for centuries, more particularly since World War II, different kind of developmental cooperation. But right now, I'm underlining the importance of developmental cooperation in the Indo-Pacific because of the pandemic and the disruption it has caused to life, matters, relationship, society, and psychology of the people. The kind of impact it has on trade and business and investment. Most of the economic activities around the world has nearly come to a standstill. Some sectors of the economy is doing better for obvious reasons. But physical trade and business activities, travel of the people and tourism and hotels and restaurants, entertainment industry, all have suffered a great deal. So every country in the Indo-Pacific and even beyond Indo-Pacific would be interested in how to continue the developmental cooperation, first to restore the economic activities before the pandemic, and secondly, to kickstart further growth activities in all sectors of the economies, respective economies of the country. So the topic is very relevant. Number two, what is this Indo-Pacific? Now, I'm sure the Vice Admiral would have told you about the meaning of Indo-Pacific and how it has come about. Very broadly, in Indo-Pacific, let me share a few actors which are playing important role in the activities of the region. Number one is in Indo-Pacific, the only superpower of the world is a major actor, that is the United States. And the only emerging superpower in the world today, China, is also very much part of the Indo-Pacific. And the relationship between the two is affecting every other relationship in literally every sector of human behavior. Number two, very important emerging economic powerhouses are also there in the Indo-Pacific region. China, South Korea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, India, some of the ASEAN countries, they are dynamic economies. And the whole world is looking at these countries to make their own economic activities more prosperous. The United States, Canada, the European Union, all are eyeing on these countries in the Indo-Pacific to build, to further build economic relationship with them so that their economies get better. Number three, in terms of regional experiences and cooperation, again, Indo-Pacific countries are very, very important. Of course, many people would give the example of the European Union as one of the most successful regional cooperative mechanisms in the world. And at one time, it was not easy to compare ASEAN, which is another successful regional mechanism, with the European Union. But today, the European Union is in deep trouble. And there are so many other regional cooperative mechanisms in Latin America, in the Western Hemisphere, and Africa. Compared to that, the dynamism that you see in terms of regional cooperation among the countries, both economic, social, political, and even otherwise, are remarkable. I'll not go into the details. Give you the example of ASEAN, IOA-ARC, Indian Ocean Association for Regional Cooperation, East Asia Summit, ASEAN Regional Forum, East and APEC. These are very important regional groupings. Now, in recent years, we have seen small groupings, not necessarily specific to a particular region, but important members of those groupings, like, for example, BRICS, RIC. But now in the Indo-Pacific, you have an emerging small dialogue group, which is known as the Quad. Now, the European Union, particularly France and Germany, and now the UK without the European Union, are showing tremendous amount of interest on the Indo-Pacific. Just about a few years ago, there are many countries, they were upset about the very Indo-Pacific concept. And they said, what was the need to have an Indo-Pacific concept? But slowly, even the European Union and France, Germany, UK, and others have taken note of. China does not like it, but China has taken note of and addressing the issues in the Indo-Pacific. Russians, even now, they oppose this kind of Quad and other activities in the Indo-Pacific. Even they also consider themselves to be an Indo-Pacific power. And the concept of Indo-Pacific region, both in terms of emerging geopolitics in the world order and the economic vibrancy, both potential and otherwise, Indo-Pacific has drawn the attention of the world. Now, this is such an important region that we have seen both cooperation, as I give the examples of all these regional groupings. Then you have the challenges. Long wars were fought in this region. For 3 years, there was a war in Korea, where the Americans were involved. There was an American involvement in the Vietnam War after the French defeat in 1954 up to 1975. Then more recently, you had the Afghanistan War, where the Americans have just left after more than 20 years of involvement in Afghanistan. Then when people talk about the piracy, this is the hotbed of piracy, Indo-Pacific region. When you talk about the drugs trafficking and the role of drugs, how it pollutes even the human mind, you have both the Golden Crescent and the Golden Triangle located in Indo-Pacific. So, and in fact, in the periphery of Indo-Pacific, you have West Asia, particularly the Persian Gulf, which is the heart of the hydrocarbon resources available in on Earth. So this is basically the profile. Now, what are the challenges faced by the countries in the Indo-Pacific right now? Again, I'll not go into the details. I'll rather expect questions and comments so that we can make it more interactive, as so many of you must be thinking about it. So I'll just give you hints about the major challenges in Indo-Pacific region. Number one challenge, which many people have been talking about it for years now, and I'm sure in the morning session also you would have heard a lot of things about China and its activities in East China Sea and South China Sea and the expanding Chinese Navy and how the Chinese are showing interest in the Indian Ocean. They have set up a base in Djibouti. They're planning to set up another naval base in Pakistan. All those things are there. The rise of China is thus one of the most important and significant developments in the Indo-Pacific region. And why? Number one, China does not say so, but it is very clear that China aspires to become a superpower. And rightly or wrongly, the Chinese are convinced that the United States of America will not allow China to be a superpower, to be at par with them, to be a rival, to be an intense competitor. So because the Chinese are convinced about it, and they think the Americans are trying to contain them, then if you see from the American perspective, they are watching a rising challenge from China in very many sectors, including economy and the military and even technology now. So China's rise, China interprets to be contributing to developmental cooperation and economic development in the region. And China brags about its BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, which is unprecedented initiative by any major power in global history. People draw comparison with Marshall Plan, which was an American plan after World War II for European economic recovery, particularly from the war-torn economies of the continent. But compared to the BRI, Marshall Plan was just nothing. So China claims that it is playing an important role for growth and stability in the region. But other countries have taken note of the disruptive consequences of China's BRI. And in the process, settling down on those BRI issues is not easy. There are countries, including India, which talks about the lack of transparency, that the whole process is only China-led and it's not a multilateral effort, that some countries are not able to even repay the debt, not even able to do the debt servicing in the process. The Chinese, which have built the roads and the ports, they are signing now lease agreements to control the economy and even the decision-making processes in those countries. So in a way, they think that this is nothing but predatory economic practices, which will ruin the economy of those countries and affect the sovereignty also. Now, on the one hand, China brags about its economic initiatives and others challenge it. And of course, many countries have accepted it for the perceived benefits that they are getting. But there is another set of activities by China, which is not liked by any country. I had just hinted already. One is the way the Chinese Navy is flexing muscle in East China Sea and laying its claim to what the Chinese call Diaoyu Island. And then it's South China Sea. South China Sea is a little larger than India. And the Chinese claim more than 90% of the waters of South China Sea to be theirs. They claim sovereignty over it. Half a dozen countries have their own claims. But claiming is not a major issue. The major issue is the Chinese reclaiming islands some of the islands which are submerged in water and they are not recognized by international law in terms of continental shelf, etc. They're putting sands and bringing them above the water and making it an island. That is also okay, but they're going a step ahead and making those islands naval facilities, and they're building runways for their aircraft. Not only that, they are denying contestant countries like Vietnam and others from exploring the resources of the ocean bed in South China Sea and literally flexing the muscle. Their ships are going and creating problem for the Filipinos in the Mischief Reef and Scarborough areas of the South China Sea. The Filipinos go to the International Court of Justice, and the Court of Justice makes it very clear that China's sovereignty is not legal. China does not care. It has become so powerful, it does not care about what ICJ says or what other claimants are saying. It is just flexing its muscle, not only in waters, but it is also flexing its muscle, all of you know very well, along the Sino-Indian border, a border which was tranquil and peaceful for such a long time. Both the Indians and the Chinese were literally, feeling very proud of saying that unlike the India-Pakistan border, where not a day would pass without some bloodshed somewhere or some bomb exploding somewhere, Sino-Indian border, not a drop of blood. But now that blood has been oozing in the minds of people because of Galwan events. So nobody likes this Chinese flexing of muscles and territorial claims and assertive behavior, because for a long time they themselves paraded a theory, peaceful rise of China. Literally every country in the world wanted to do business with China, and they were aspiring for co-prosperity. China argued that we are not a country which is going to set up colonies. We are not an imperial power. We are a very peaceful country. Come and do business and you become prosperous, and even we would like to make a lot of money out of it. So that is how the international business and trade activities and the new supply chains with China picked up. And once they achieve certain level of economic capability, now they're flexing their muscle and showing their true colors. So that theory is no longer accepted by anyone. And this is a very big challenge, how to settle with it. Now, one can give a long lecture on the Sino-US relationship and how the trade war kind of thing is going on right now. It was started by the Trump administration, and the Biden administration is continuing with that. And because of that economic Cold War, which some people say economic Cold War, it's affecting the trade and business activities of so many other countries in the region. And China, by the way, became the #1 trade partner of more than 100 countries, including India and including the American allies in Southeast Asia, like ASEAN, and even Japan, even South Korea. Right? So now the big question for the countries of the Indo-Pacific is, if the Americans and the Chinese quarrel, what shall we do? How to take sides? During the Cold War time, between the US and the USSR, there were many countries which took sides. Many countries under India's influence and guidance adopted a policy of non-alignment. But now, a big question is there in everybody's mind. China is a good economic partner. America is a good security provider. What do we do? They're quarreling, right? So this is a challenge. How to resolve this dilemma is one of the major challenges in the region. Then comes the non-traditional security threats like terrorism, religious extremism, drugs, piracy, etc. The reason I'm highlighting this is pandemic has created so much of problem in the society, in the economies of almost every country, that all these non-traditional threats are bound to come to the surface. And one of the examples that is playing out in front of all of our eyes is Afghanistan. The US was involved in Afghanistan along with the NATO members for 20 years. Now they have all gone back. In the process, the non-state actors have become so powerful. The way the Taliban itself is flexing muscle and spreading its influence over more than 80% of the Afghan territory. Um, this is a bright example of how things may happen now and in the near future because of the pandemic. The criminal activities which has risen, mental health has become a major problem. Millions of people have lost their jobs. So many companies have gone bankrupt, and the banks are not able to get back their loan that they have issued and all. The governments are not able to have enough revenue to govern, and because of these problems created by the pandemic, the non-state actors are most likely to show up in a more dangerous way. And how to prevent that? If those things happen, how to tackle that are the major challenges in Indo-Pacific region. Now, let me say one or two things about other things that's happening in the region, other developments. One is what is known as the Quadrilateral Security Initiative, involving the US, India, Japan, and Australia. Now, it was an old concept. It was buried for about 10 years. It began in 2007. Until 2017, nobody thought about it. Suddenly, it was revived in Manila during the East Asia Summit. And now it has become, it has come to the surface, and it has become a very dynamic groupings of four democracies of the Indo-Pacific region. ASEAN was not very comfortable with Quad. ASEAN thought that ASEAN would be marginalized. If the Quad rises, ASEAN's centrality will disappear. China thought that it is nothing but a kind of ganging up against China. These Quad countries are going to contain China. The Russians are now teaming up with China and saying, Quad is no good, and it is both the Russians and the Chinese think it is almost an Asian NATO, a North Atlantic Treaty Organization, Asian Pact, Asian NATO, and Cold War days are back, and this is not a very constructive thing happening. There are some friendly countries like South Korea, Indonesia, even New Zealand. Apparently, they feel left out. 5-4. How about us? But whatever it is, there was a summit of the Quad in March. It was in the virtual domain. And in coming September, there is going to be an in-person summit of Quad. Quad is not a TT. It is not a pact. There is no secretariat. No regular meetings yet of the top officials, but it is evolving in ways that may someday become institutionalized, and that is giving nightmare to China and Russia. There are two other things that the students of the business school should be interested. One is the RCEP, Regional Cooperative Economic Partnership, and the other one is CPTPP. Initially, it was Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP. Later, it became CPTPP. Now, RCEP, which was signed last year in November, is the largest trading zone, trade bloc in the world. Many people thought that RCEP is very important, and even India should join it. But at the last moment, India stayed away from RCEP. Japan and Australia, two important members of the Quad, have joined RCEP, and the Americans are not in it. There is another one. Which is um, CPTPP, where the United States was an important member of CPTPP, but Donald Trump, on the very first day in his office, he walked out of it. But even without the United States, there are 12 countries, including the US. The rest of the 11 countries, they are going ahead with CPTPP. Because of the pandemic and the Chinese behavior and the Chinese punishment to Australia, but the Australians have already suffered $3 billion and all. It is a big question whether Japan and Australia will be very committed partner of RCEP or not. It's a big question mark. And India is out of it. CPTPP, what is the value of CPTPP if the Americans are not in? Will the US join CPTPP? We don't know yet. But the doors are open both for India and the US in RCEP and CPTPP. But basically, RCEP is China-led and CPTPP was the US-led. Whether CPTPP and RCEP are going to compete or not compete, we don't know. It's very, very confusing because Japan and Australia they are in both, and quite a few other countries are in both, but they're not taking up the ground. In the process, what has happened was, I gave you the examples of so many regional cooperation mechanism in Indo-Pacific, like East Asia Summit and ASEAN Regional Forum and APAC. You know, the Indo-Pacific concept and its evolution is making those organizations a little lackluster. And how things are going to play out, we do not know. Now, let me give some of my concluding observations, and then we can have full interaction on these issues. I gave you the profile of the Indo-Pacific. I talked about the challenges in the Indo-Pacific. Then I hinted at the new developments taking place, like Quad and all, in the Indo-Pacific. Now, when you see the big picture, it appears as if a new kind of competition is already evolving and going to become more intense between the democracies and the authoritarian governance. Again, one will be led by the United States and the other one by China. So Chinese economy has grown in such a way, and it's become so successful that people are talking about the success story and the relevance of authoritarian capitalism. The American version of capitalism is different, it's commercial capitalism. And China's success story is providing inspiration to many countries in Africa, in Arabia, and others. So in the Indo-Pacific also, you have, countries like North Korea and Pakistan and Iran, China and Laos and Cambodia. All these countries which China supports, they are going to have their own competition and maybe some kind of resistance to what the Americans are going to do in terms of, again, promoting democracy. There's going to be a summit of democracy and all those things. Secondly, pandemic, it's almost more than 1.5 years. International cooperation, regional cooperation, all those things have taken a backseat because of pandemic. And nationalism as a force has come up. In the process, as many countries would try the very best to revive their economies and provide adequate health security to their people, nationalism is going to play a role. So there may be limits of regional cooperation. We have seen some of the difficult things happening in the European Union, for example, when Italy was deeply in trouble. At that time, European Union members were not able to help Italy. then Italy questioned the very existence of the European Union. Because every country is going like America first, every country says my country first, then what kind of interaction will take place as and when the countries aspire to promote developmental cooperation is a very big challenge. Third, the hegemonic ambition of China and the American determination to continue to be the number one power in the world will also create different kind of challenges to many countries, including India. And then I would suggest that while we talk about geoeconomy, geopolitics, and big power relationship, and the established power and the aspiring superpower are going to fight, all those things are big picture. But the bottom line is the number of poor people in many countries in Indo-Pacific has increased tremendously because large number of people have become unemployed, lost their jobs. In many families, so many people have died, and even the economic conditions are pathetic. Lot many migrant laborers who went and worked abroad are returning even to India. And where are the jobs in India? So poverty is going to be a major challenge for every country. And secondly, crime, both domestic as well as international crime. The syndicates are going to be more powerful. And finally, the Quad versus Quad, as the US, India, Australia, and Japan have formed a quadrilateral security initiative. The Chinese, the Russians, the Pakistanis, and the Iranians are trying to have their own Quad. And China is trying to even bring in Turkey into it and make it quintet. So situation in the future is not very bright. The potential of economic growth is tremendous in the Indo-Pacific region, more than Europe and Western Hemisphere and even Africa. The US, Canada, European Union, all would look at Indo-Pacific's economy to revive and prosper so that global economy will have certain amount of stability. But the challenges are there and I've explained. So this is the situation in the Indo-Pacific. I gave you the very broad picture, the big scene, but I'm sure many of you would have many questions, and I will learn from your questions and try to answer to the extent possible. So let me stop here and give more time for interaction. Sridharji, now the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor. In fact, it's not easy to break the complexities of geopolitics that the Indo-Pacific region has, and you have attempted to do that, and really you've covered almost all the aspects which I'm sure many of the participants are having in their minds. Just to start the QA, of course, there are already some 7-8 things lined up here. Should I read it out, or you want them to?
Yep. Read out one or two so that I can.
Sure. So first thing is Rituraj Mate. He is asking, is balancing between the Chinese affordable economic products and its aggressive policies towards its core interests, one China on the one hand, and concept of free world and developed world on the other side, going to be a major challenge for countries in the region? That's one question, and probably the second one you can just check if you can. This is from Sanchit T. Ghosh, and he's asking, how do you perceive India's two maritime spaces, Bay of Bengal and Arabian Sea, and how can India use these two maritime spaces to pursue its neighborhood policies? And he asked a similar question to Admiral too, but would be interesting to see a perspective from you.
All right, the first one, China is a very peculiar country, and its development is very complex. Now, even today, US and China are the two largest economic partner. Number two, number two, uh, the economic relationship between US and China are so intertwined that a Cold War of the type that we witnessed for 40 years between the US and the USSR is not possible between US and China. And in the newspapers, you must have seen about the economic Cold War, the tariff war between the US and China, and very hardline policies of Trump administration and even Biden administration. In spite of all this, US-China trade moved positively in the middle of the pandemic. So on the one hand, they have tremendous amount of differences and they compete very harshly. On the other hand, cooperation is going on and the trade is going on between the two. On the one hand, the Americans are trying to have a new kind of supply chain which would not pass through China. But at the same time, there is a growing realization among many economists that you cannot ignore China have any kind of supply chain, because there are a lot many companies in very many countries producing small parts, and it is the assembly time, it is assembled somewhere. And directly or indirectly, China connection is there. You cannot ignore China, right? So what is going to happen is a complex set of competition, cooperation, and sometimes even conflict, but never war. War is very, very unlikely. It will remain so. Like when Anthony Blinken was in Delhi recently, Austin, the defense secretary, was visiting Singapore and Vietnam and Philippines. Here, somebody asked a question to Mr. Blinken, saying that with the help of the Pakistanis, there is a Taliban delegation in China, and the Chinese are talking to Taliban. So what do you think? He did not criticize China. He said, whatever is happening in Afghanistan is of interest to all the regional countries, including China. And if they're trying to sort out the problem in a very constructive way so that Taliban does not use the force to come to power, then so be it. But there in Southeast Asia, Jane Austen says, he coins a new term actually. It's very, very important, particularly for the students of defense security and all. He talks about an integrated deterrence. And he says that China is challenging all the important political, social, cultural values of the West. And China is challenging a rule-based order in the Indo-Pacific. China wants to violate the rule. China is making its own rule. And we have to deter China from doing that. And then he uses the term integrated deterrence. That simply means the US cannot do things on its own. It has to be an integrated approach by the US and its partners, its alliance partners and the strategic partners. It's going to be complex like that. The second question is about India and Bay of Bengal and Arabian Sea. See, India is the dominant power in the Indian Ocean region. For a long time, major powerful countries were coming and selling their ships in the Indian Ocean. India used to introduce a resolution in the UN General Assembly every year saying Indian Ocean should be declared a zone of peace. But then nobody listened to India because powerful navies always sail through, they don't care. India does not talk about a zone of peace in Indian Ocean anymore. India's foreign policy orientation has now changed. India rather has tried to create a kind of regional cooperative mechanism consisting of all the rim countries of the Indian Ocean, IOA-ARC. And there are so many activities going on there. Simultaneously, the Indian Navy, I'm sure General Luthra, the Vice Admiral Luthra would have talked about it, There is an Indian Ocean Naval Symposium where most of the regional navies are together. Indian Navy is playing a tremendous amount of diplomatic role as well to maintain peace and stability in the Indian Ocean so that there could be co-prosperity of the member countries of the Indian Ocean. People are talking about the blue economy now, how to harness the resources of the oceans, and there should be win-win growth and development for all in the region. Having said that, you say India does not want to confine itself to South Asia. It has a concept of extended neighborhood. And by using the rim countries both along the Bay of Bengal and the Arabian Sea, India aspires to have a larger region as the region of its national interest. It's going beyond that. Right now, the major challenge that is coming to India, not in terms of economy, in terms of geopolitics. Indian Ocean and the South China Sea, they are important trading routes. Large number of ships on a daily basis they move through Indian Ocean. China is slowly coming to Indian Ocean with its naval power. There are people who talk about a string of pearls, how China is trying to maintain a base in Pakistan and Myanmar and Djibouti. China's logic is different. China is saying that we get our natural resources from Africa, we get our oil and gas resources from the Persian Gulf, and both are so important for Chinese industries, and both are passing through Indian Ocean. So they want to ensure that no country, including India, should be able to disrupt. And that is why they are coming in a very big way to Indian Ocean. But given the Chinese behavior, as I explained, nobody thinks that this is a very benevolent presence of the Chinese Navy. And one of the reasons why the Indo-Pacific concept came and the confluence of the two seas, the Americans wanted to put them together as an integrated area of defense. So in Diego Garcia, there is an American base. Then, of course, in Japan and South Korea and Australia, the American bases are there. So the major challenge for India would be how China behaves. They're sending their submarines even to Sri Lanka and the neighboring countries. They're expanding their influence in Maldives. So these are the major concerns for India.
So the next question is from Nadeem Iqbal. Keeping in mind the future of the eastern corridor of INSTC, which passes through Afghanistan and India's investments there, should India engage with Taliban since we see countries like China already being talking with Taliban? A part of it, of course, you responded, but you may elaborate on that. The second one is, does India currently possess the capacity to be a leader in the Indo-Pacific structurally, militarily, and behaviorally? If not, then what is the way ahead in overall policy development, which amalgamates the economic aim with political and military aim? This is from Saurav Datta Gupta.
First is on Taliban. You see, the original Taliban was created by Pakistan. Taliban would not have been able to come to power if the regular armed forces of Pakistan would not have helped them in winning the war against the Northern Alliance, which was ruling the country in 95-96. When Taliban came to power, they adopted an extreme form of ancient Islamic rules and regulations, Sharia law and all. In the process, they destroyed the Bamiyan Buddha statues. In the process, they were responsible for hijacking of the Indian Air India plane. In the process, they were involved in bombing of the Indian embassies, Indian consulates in 2008, 2009, 2010, and all that. They were not allowing even the Indian workers to do all kinds of constructive activities in Afghanistan. And India had no other option but to say that this is a terrorist organization and we cannot have anything to do with them. There is nothing called good Taliban and the bad Taliban. India rebuked even the Obama administration when they said, let us talk to the good Taliban. India vehemently said, what is good Taliban? The one who would like to talk to you, they're good Taliban. Of course, the Taliban themselves, they said the Americans are trying to divide them. So India has been consistently opposed to Taliban. Even now, when Anthony Blinken was in India, in the statement, there was a press conference where India says the following: nobody should be allowed to assume power in Kabul by force. There should be a democratic way and peaceful resolution and formation of a government there. That simply means India opposes Taliban coming to power through force. Right? Then India says that not only that, India would not welcome any kind of malevolent influence from outside. India was hinting at Pakistan's connection with the Taliban. Having said all this, now the big question is, should India talk to the Taliban? There are two views. One view says, no, Taliban is not going to be cooperative with India. Pakistan is lying to the world when it says that it has no control or influence over Taliban anymore. Pakistan quietly maintains all its supply connection of arms and equipment and even money sometimes with the Taliban. Pakistan was eagerly waiting for the American NATO forces to return, so Pakistan influence will increase in Afghanistan. Pakistan thinks that any kind of Indian presence would be against the Pakistani interest, so that is why they are systematically grooming the Taliban and will continue to do so. So why talk to the Taliban? What is the use of it? The Chinese are talking to them because China thinks that Taliban will not interfere in Xinjiang province. But that is only Chinese approach. What is going to happen, we don't know. We don't know. The East Turkestan movement which is going on in Xinjiang, and they have connection with some kind of extremist elements in Afghanistan and even in Pakistan. And when the Chinese find that if there was a Pakistani hand, Pakistan becomes so scared of China that Pakistan sends the ISI chief to Beijing to say, the government did not have any role. We'll try to control them. Please bear with us. They're scared of China. But China is making an attempt with the help of Pakistan that Taliban will not interfere in Xinjiang province. That's why. If the Chinese think that there is going to be stability in Afghanistan, that is why they will come and start mining work, they are living in a fool's paradise. Right now, nobody can say that Afghanistan is going to be stable in the near future. Right? And then, because Taliban is against India, China and Pakistan would benefit from it. So if that is the case, why talk to Taliban? So this is one strong view. If you see the other side, people are saying, be practical. Americans went and intervened militarily in Afghanistan because Taliban refused to hand over Osama bin Laden to them after the 9/11 attack. And the Americans fought with the Taliban for 20 years. It is the same Americans who demonized Taliban, fought with them, tried to contain them, failed to do so, and negotiated with them in Doha. So the US in a way gave certain amount of legitimacy to them. Now the Chinese are talking to them, and Pakistan is saying that no, it's not the same Taliban. Even we don't want Taliban using force to come to power and all. So are the Central Asian republics. Even Moscow invited the Taliban leaders to hold dialogue there. So why should India be the only country which should oppose Taliban in so many words and not approach them and try to talk to them? So this is another view. My view is, right now, this new Taliban is desperate to somehow come to power. Their first priority is come to power through force. If they succeed in doing that, no regional country will like it, not even the Americans. So there is a possibility of this new Taliban regime getting completely isolated, the way they were isolated in the past also, and only three countries recognize them: UAE, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia. The same thing will happen now. Now, the US abandoned Afghanistan after the Soviet withdrew in 1989. That is why the civil war, that is why the Northern Alliance comes to power, that is why the Pakistan having a free hand train the Taliban, and Taliban comes to power. And all, right? But now the Americans have, withdrew the troops, but openly they're saying that we are continuing our engagement with Afghanistan. The Afghan president Ghani and Abdullah, they went to White House and they talked to Joe Biden. Right? Now, even Anthony Blinken is making a statement that even our embassy is there, and we want to continue to help those constructive things that we have done over 20 years, like education for women, child, and so many related things and all. So because the US is engaged, and there is an Afghan National Army, and the Afghan National Army has been trained by the NATO forces. Taliban is a non-state actor. There is a national army. It's not going to be easy for the Taliban to just go and fight and capture power. Yes, there are many areas where the Afghan National Army fellows literally surrendered, handed over the weapons and said, we are with you. But there are other areas, out of fear, they went to Tajikistan. There are many tribal chiefs which don't listen to Taliban. They want to have their own control in their own little region in Afghanistan. So the situation is still very complex. The efforts are there not to allow Taliban to come to power on its own. So the current policy of the government of India is okay. No need to talk to them right now. But if worse comes to worse, if the world is going to engage with them, I don't think India should say that if the world is engaging, we'll remain in our own cocoon. We should not. What was the second question? India power. You see, there are many people who doubt whether India can play an important role, a leadership role or not. Interestingly, it is the Americans and the Europeans, the Japanese and others who say that India should play a leadership role. India has all the eligibility and the capability and the credibility to play an important role. All of them think that even when India was not an economic powerhouse, India was not a military power, and India was not a nuclear weapon power, even those days, India's voice was heard in 100 plus countries in the non-aligned movement and the G77. Today, India is a nuclear weapon power. Today, India is the 5th largest economy in the world. Recently, Indian economy became, the GDP became more than the British economy, Great Britain's economy. So Britain became number 6 and India became number 3, right? And today, India's role in G20 is considered. Today, even G7 invites India to sit as an observer. Even the Chinese allowed India to be an observer in SCO. The ASEAN countries have made India a full dialogue partner. India was an original member when East Asia Summit was established. So an India of this kind is a leader. It is not a supreme leader. It does not want a kind of, hegemony that China and the Americans are trying to have. But India's voice is heard. India's role is important. India cannot be ticked off. Right? India is a military power, a diplomatic power, a democratic country, a resilient democracy, and its voice is heard around the world. And now, in any case, India is also a member of the UN Security Council right now. So, before Indo-Pacific, there was Asia-Pacific concept. Indians, including me, we used to argue in most of these seminars and webinars. When India applies for membership in APAC, many countries would argue, oh, India is not a Pacific country. Why should India become a member of APEC? I used to argue that before APEC was set up in 1989, in 1954, when Southeast Asia Treaty Organization was set up, Pakistan was made a member of Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, and Pakistan is west of India. If Pakistan, so it all depends how you interpret. If America is a Pacific country, America is not an Asian country. So if India is not a Pacific country, India is an Asian country. And how can we ignore India? But the fact remains that India could not become a member of APEC. But the moment the concept of Indo-Pacific comes, India is one of the central members of the Indo-Pacific concept. Of course, ASEAN for some time thought they were marginalized, but India itself is saying that ASEAN centrality in discussion, negotiation about peace, stability, development will remain. India cannot ignore ASEAN, but at the same time, India's leadership is given. It is happening.
Excellent. The next is from Dr. Mukund. He says he thanks you for the fascinating insights. He has a question which says, don't you think that Quad countries need to assimilate ASEAN into a greater dialogue of open and free access, security and prosperity of Indo-Pacific? Part of it you checked with. And the second is from Bharat Malani. Can we presume that the Chinese Wolf War strategy is the main reason for increasing international focus on Indo-Pacific?
Say that again, what is China?
Can we presume that the Chinese Wolf Warrior strategy is the main reason for increasing international focus on Indo-Pacific?
All right. And first one.
Yeah.
You know, as I said, Quad is not a regional grouping. Quad is not a regional cooperative mechanism. Quad is not an alliance, military alliance. Quad is not even an economic organization. What Quad is not is easy to understand than what Quad is. You know, at the moment, it is a security dialogue process. Anthony Blinken, even India, have made it very clear that Quad is not an anti-China grouping. Quad is not going to contain China. And when the summit took place in March, that time, the emphasis was given on cybersecurity, emerging technology, vaccine distribution, climate change, not about China. The joint statement that was issued after the summit, before the March summit, the many meetings took place. Not a single time there was a joint statement. All the four countries would make four different statements from their respective capitals. But the moment a joint statement came after the March summit, it was an indication that Quad is becoming more and more sophisticated. Quad has come to stay. Quad will be strengthened further. Right. Now, the argument is these are the four major economic power, military power, and democracies. And the goals are, as I said, for vaccine distribution and climate change and emerging technology, cyber security, etc. Now, there is no plan at the moment either to institutionalize Quad or to expand the membership. There are ideas about having a set of observers, like South Korea could become an observer. So ASEAN can become an observer as a grouping, not as an individual country. New Zealand can also become an observer. So there are proposals to have co-opt some more democracies of the region in the status of an observer. What happens is, whenever a grouping begins, the moment you expand it, then it becomes so amorphous it's not going to work out. You cannot do anything. There has to be a limit. There has to be a time gap. It should be allowed to evolve first. So at the moment, Quad cannot go after ASEAN as a member. It will remain only a dialogue process. About wolf for diplomacy. You see, Chinese have acquired considerable amount of sophistication in conducting diplomacy. Considerable. Of course, if you see the history up to 1960s, from 45 to 1968, China was isolated by the Western world. It was a communist country. It sided with Russia, the Soviet Union for some time. Then it fought the Soviet Union along the Ussuri River, and there was Sino-Soviet split. Until the Americans engaged them, they were nowhere in the picture, confined to their little region and within the country, domestic, cultural evolution and so many things. But slowly, when China was co-opted by the Americans, and the Americans were responsible for making China an emerging superpower. If the US would not have opened up China, if the US would not have allowed China to do business with, Chinese economy would not have been the way it is today, right? But in the process, when China's economy became very powerful, it became the largest consumer of luxury goods in the world. It became the largest importer, largest exporter, largest manufacturer, number one banker to the United States. And China is flushed with money. Xi Jinping comes to India and says, we can invest $20 billion. Goes to Pakistan and says, we can invest $60 billion in CPEC. Goes to Latin America and says, China is prepared to invest $260 billion. Can an American president do that? Where is the money? American economy is driven by private companies, corporate America. But the Chinese government controls all their companies. It is state capitalism. Right? And as China becomes economically powerful, it expands its military and its technical capability. So its sophistication has increased. This so-called wolf for diplomacy. That means China is now getting ready to pay back in the same coin what the rest of the world would attack them. That is why, when the Americans say, let us talk about the human rights issue, the Chinese would say, let us talk about the human rights issue in the United States. Even India doesn't do that. No country does that. But China is saying that. You talk about our Xinjiang province, what happened on 6th of January in the Capitol Hill, your democracy. What kind of democracy you have? You have your own polarization, you have Trumpism, and you have your own religious extremists. So don't talk to us on human rights. We have our own concept. So likewise on each and everything, including this Quad thing, it's China which, trumpets, ASEAN NATO in the making. Nobody does. But having said that, I will not say that because of China's role for diplomacy, Indo-Pacific has become important. Even if Indo-Pacific concept would not have been there, China's pull for diplomacy would have continued, would have emerged and continued. And when Obama was talking about pivot to Asia, right, at that time, China was proposing its own new architecture in Asia. They had their own meeting. For everything that America proposes, China would propose its own. The innovative things like, for example, maritime Silk Road, still new Silk Road, Belt and Road Initiative, win-win for the whole world. So Chinese diplomacy has evolved and they become more assertive. They become more talkative. They would not talk. Earlier, in most of the conferences, the Chinese guy would be keeping mum. He would say something in Chinese which nobody would understand. And sometimes they would come with a prepared speech, say something in English, and the Chinese version is totally different for domestic speech. But now, China is bold. You read Global Times and the language. And when Anthony Blinken was coming to India, Chinese say, this South Asian country will not cooperate with USA because the Indians and Americans have differences over Afghanistan, differences over human rights, and differences over even vaccine. So, wolf for diplomacy had to come, and it has come. That doesn't mean that we don't have any counter. Let me share this. A long time ago, I used to write a lot of things on China also, although I specialize on the USA. At one time, there was something in some Chinese paper. He said, what is India? There are so many states. Every state can become an independent country. Country is so diverse. Indians are not united. Or like that. Then immediately I wrote a piece saying, China is not a united country. China is homogeneous, but there are so many minorities in China. Look at Xinjiang, it can be an independent country. Look at Tibet, it can be an independent country. Look at Hong Kong, is already independent, it's going to be more independent. Look at Taiwan, China is not able to do anything about it. Look at Yunnan, Yunnan was independent at one time. So I have to counter. I was the wolf that time. Right? So now, whatever the Chinese are saying or doing, we can do that. And in fact, to some extent, we are already doing it. Look, Narendra Modi ji picking up the phone and talking to Dalai Lama and saying, happy birthday to you. Never before. Never before. Narendra Modi went to USA, and when a joint statement was issued with Obama, first time in the joint statement, South China Sea and the Chinese role was mentioned. So India was not calling a spade a spade. Now even India is calling a spade a spade. Right? Okay. 2 minutes more.
Yeah. This is from Don George Verghese. What are your thoughts on G7 B3W? I mean, as against Chinese BRI? How can it challenge the geopolitical outreach of China around the world?
You see,
B3W.
I'll be very brief because I'm getting calls from the ministry. I have to.
Okay.
Yeah. You see, there are two things here. There is a way to counter the BRI, and it is already in operation. The G7 altogether, in terms of their capital, availability of capital, cannot compete with China. Cannot compete with China. The amount of money China is prepared to invest in the BRI project, G7 cannot. Partly because of domestic political dynamics, partly because of their own rules and regulations. They cannot. Does that mean that there is no counter? There is, which they are doing. Now, the word is spreading that China's BRI project is not multilateral. It is China-driven, China-centric. China decides. Then it is predatory economic practice. I have used this argument in 2-3 webinars saying China is becoming a new kind of imperial power. Those who study imperialism, the theory of imperialism, the concept of imperialism, they'll find that China's role will not fit in because China is still run by a communist party. It's not a capitalist country in that sense of the term. It is state capital. But China's practices in other countries is something similar to what the imperial powers, colonial powers were doing. And that was a wake-up call given by me. In Sri Lanka, I've gone to Sri Lanka. I've gone to Hambantota port, right? They signed an agreement. The Chinese technicians, the Chinese engineers, the Chinese laborers, the Chinese money all came and they built the port. Where was the job for the Sri Lankans? And now the Sri Lankans are not having enough money to even pay the interest. In the process, the Chinese bulldozed them and said, sign this agreement. Lease agreement, 99 years, China will control Hambantota port. I was in Nepal. In Nepal, they invited me to speak. The who's who of the town was there. When I told them the real color of the Chinese investment, all of them opposed me because in the morning they had signed an agreement already with China. But I said, look, I'm not Mr. India. I'm not government of India. I'm not a diplomat. I'm a master. I'll tell you whatever I understand. Take it or leave it. And I explain to them how ultimately China is going to control ABCD in your country. Pakistanis have woken up. Why do you think 9 Chinese were killed? Now, those were involved in some dam project as part of the China-Pakistan economic corridor. So even the Chinese have realized, as Pakistanis have realized, the European countries have realized. So the best way to expose the BRI is to show to the world this is not going to benefit you in the long term. Right now, you don't have money. You are getting money and even technicians and engineers to build roads and ports and airports and all those nice things. But you are going to become a rentier state. So G7 proposal not going to work. Americans don't have that much of money. Even this India, Japan, Asia and Africa corridor, where is the money to beat the Chinese? But together, one can expose the illegal and even immoral practices of the Chinese project. And that is how things are going to change.
Excellent. I think one last question from my side,
Okay.
if you permit. What do you think could be the areas where India, US, and China could come together and work together in the space of Indo-Pacific? I mean, in the morning, in the welcome address, Sean Route, he's the political and economic chief in the US consulate here. He did mention that climate change is one area where we could come together. What do you think? What could be the couple of areas where all the three countries could come together?
There are quite a few areas where China, US, and India can really work together. But at the moment, it is normative. At the moment, it can be a goal, but it will take quite a while to reach the goal. One, of course, climate change, it is not, it is a compulsion for everyone. Those who are polluting, they have to stop polluting. Without the cooperation of China and the US, climate change will create more and more problems. Look at the wildfire in the USA. Look at the flood in Europe. Look at the flood in China and Western India. It's all examples of climate change. Wildfire in Australia. Things are going to get worse. So every country has a responsibility. Here, China and India the US and China being the largest polluters, India being one of the leaders in promoting clean technology and climate change leadership, we can work together. And we do work together, I think, number one. Number two, India worked out of RCEP precisely because Chinese were trying to make RCEP like BRI. In BRI, no country can make a proposal. No country can decide the amount of money. No country can decide anything. It's all Beijing center. In RCEP, everybody knows that it is going to be China driven. And when India was negotiating with them, there are quite a few areas. Those who are doing economics, they can read more. There are quite a few areas, including, for example, the country of origin was an issue. Then the fear. Then there are subsidy issues. So there are sensitive domestic issues which cannot be traded, and the US is not part of it. Now, there can be negotiation, discussion on economic issues. China is prepared to trade with others. Today, interestingly, China is promoting globalization more as an idea than the Western countries, which have got a lot of negative consequences of globalization, and they're opposing it now. America first and all the protectionist tendencies are coming up. This is where we can work together. WTO is becoming almost useless now for a variety of reasons. China, India, and the US can play an important role in giving a new shape to the WTO. And number three is all this trade business, RCEP, CPTPP. Why are they talking only about the traded visible material goods? One of the forte where India does well is the service industry. So why not talk about service industry also? This is where we can start negotiation. After all, India continued to do trade with China in spite of the Galwan Valley incident, in spite of what we did to their technology companies in India. our trade continued positively. And same thing happened in US-China also. So China, India, US being trade partner and trading with one another, there is an area where we can talk.
Thank you, Professor. Very insightful and really enjoyed the lecture, and I'm sure all the 108 participants echo my words. Thank you, and we come to the end of this session, and thank you, sir, for your valuable time and sparing your time with us.